So we are here with Congresswoman Pressley, and I just want to thank you for your time. I know that you have a very full plate. I do appreciate you always making time for your district and for all the work that you do, not just in politics, but for all the work that you do for women and for girls. You are such a trailblazer, and I'm so honored that you could be part of this day to give a charge to women in terms of our civic responsibility in our communities and in our nation and in our world. So thank you again for your time. Thank you for being a trailblazer, and thank you for
Literally everything that you just very generously extended to me, I could say the exact same thing back to you. So, just thank you for the role that you play in community. Thank you for the selfless way with which you labor in love in so many ways. I'm so inspired by your example.
thank
So
you.
grateful for the ministry of Jubilee.
Thank
I
you.
told you offline, and I will make sure the public knows that I feel that you prayed me into this
Thank you.
congressional seat. And I was on Insta just yesterday, and Pastor Matt was praying for me
Yes.
and for all of us that are civic leaders and elected officials. And you all are consistent.
Yes, thank you, thank you.
And
It
so
has
thank you so
been,
much.
it's been such a season for women trailblazers in politics in Massachusetts. And, you know, what an honor to really have one of the forerunners present today with the women that are tuned in for the Dash Takeover. I wanted to talk to you about civic responsibility as it pertains to first our community. I was watching the Michelle Obama documentary, and she talked about, you know, where we are today as a country and how in the last election, national election, that, you know, the voices that were not heard and the votes that were not given. And so can you speak to us a little bit about our civic responsibility in terms of locally, and then how the local responsibility affects the national responsibility?
Sure. Well, first, I just want to say that I define civic responsibility much more broadly than casting a vote.
Yes.
And, women are civic leaders in community every day. And whether or not history records their contributions, make no mistake about it that women are future shapers, our nation builders, our community builders, our movement builders. We are table shakers, we are truth and justice seekers, and we are the preservers of democracy. And Black women in particular have been the most reliable voting bloc of the Democratic Party. And so it is not an overstatement to elevate the specific role that we have played as preservers and stewards of democracy. And I do think that people typically define civic engagement as either running for office or voting. I think it is much more than that. It's what I see happening in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic, people that are extending mutual aid and collective care, who are, sharing food, providing food, speaking life into someone, praying, providing supportive childcare, dominating our essential workforces. That is civic engagement. There are things that we can all do, like ensure that you are counted in the census.
Yes.
That is civic engagement.
Yes.
The Massachusetts 7th, which I represent, includes Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, Randolph, Everett, Chelsea, and Milton. This is an almost 800,000 person strong district. It is 53% people of color, 40% foreign born, almost 40% single female headed households. 1 in 4 children are like myself and are the child of a currently or formerly incarcerated parent.
Mm,
And so this is a diverse and vibrant and dynamic district, but it's one of the most unequal in the country.
mm.
We know that in a 3-mile radius from Cambridge to Roxbury, the life expectancy drops by 30 years
Wow.
and median household income by $50,000. Now, why am I offering these sobering statistics? We live this, so we know this.
Hmm.
But your civic charge is doing things like championing urban farming, address our
Yes.
food justice issues.
Hmm.
Why are we dying at higher rates of COVID-19? Why do we have the shortest life expectancy period? It
Hmm.
has everything to do with the fact that grocery stores determine where to open based on census tracts.
Hmm.
And because we don't make sure that we are accurately counted, we are missing out on federal investments, and that trickles all the way down to quite literally where grocery stores decide to open. And so, because of food injustices and unequal access to fresh and healthy food, we also represent a higher proportion of those living with heart disease
Hmm.
and diabetes and asthma. And so, I know I'm speaking about a lot of things, Pastor
Hmm.
Mona, but that is because these things are all interconnected.
Yes.
So when I think about civic engagement, it is you are doing your part. If you could change the fact that in a 3-mile radius, median household income drops by $50,000, if you stop the trend of the Black dollar only staying in our community for 6 hours,
Wow. That
it
was,
only stays in our community for
yeah.
6 hours. So yes, voting matters, and I need
Yes.
folks to vote. But it's my job to incentivize you to vote.
Yes.
I don't think that people don't vote because they are ignorant and apathetic and they don't know any better. People don't vote not because they don't know anything. It's because they know too much,
Hmm.
informed by their own lived experiences, their own hardships about I say policy is my love language, Pastor Mona, because hate and discrimination has been codified in policy.
Yes.
And that is why we have these inequities, these
Mm.
disparities, these racial injustices. These things didn't just happen. Those sobering numbers that I offered to you, they exist because Black folks did not have equal access to the GI Bill,
Hmm.
because of Jim Crow,
Hmm.
because of redlining, which compromised our ability to build generational wealth. So
Hmm.
do what you can
Right.
where you are with what you have. So your civic action could be that I am just going to support local business. I am
Yes.
just going to support Black business. I
Hmm.
am just going to support women-owned businesses. Your civic action could be that you lean in and make sure that you are not just physically present in your child's life, but that you are emotionally present.
Yes.
Because the best gift that we can give any child is a stable adult. Your
Hmm.
civic action could be that you are going to create an urban garden or an urban farm to increase access to fresh and healthy food so we combat health disparities. Or your civic action could be that you are going to pray in or invest in or vote for a civic leader that will see you and
Yes.
fight for you every day.
So I'm glad that you brought up the census because that was one of the other topics that I want to talk to you about to really, and I think you have explained it just in terms of, civic engagement and responsibility. Uh, what can women do that are listening? Because you gave the sound bites of, listen, you can, if you plant a garden, that's civic engagement, civic responsibility.
Absolutely.
What can women do in terms of the census? Because, you see the census, you're getting it in the mail, it's all over, it's in the library,
Fill it out.
fill it out.
If you are wondering, complete it.
Hmm.
If you are wondering why it seems that um, there isn't the fair share of funds being accessed and you don't see the same investments in your community, that is directly connected to the census. You know how folks are waiting on their stimulus check? My good friend Stacey Abrams says if you don't complete the census, this is the equivalent of waiting a decade for your stimulus check. Okay?
Hmm.
Because in the eyes of the federal government, if you are not counted, you don't count. And what does that mean? That your community will not get their fair share for public education,
Mm-hmm.
for community development block grants, which determines affordable housing,
Mm-hmm.
for Social Security, for Medicare, for language access. Something like 20,000 children were undercounted in our district. So that means that they're not getting the federal investment and the resourcing that they need. For every person that is not counted, we lose 20,000 federal dollars.
Wow.
And our children have been the most undercounted. Black men are the most undercounted. And out of the 100 largest cities in the country, Boston is ninth in being hardest to count.
Wow.
So we are a hard to count district. And also, Pastor Mona, census counts determine political representation. They determine how many congressional districts you get and whether or not you have representation. So this determines everything.
Mm-hmm.
It determines how many seats you have representing you in Congress. It determines how those seats are, the lines with which how they're written.
Mm-hmm.
It determines your federal allocation of dollars.
Yes.
So it is the foundation for everything. And whatever we do, we have to live with for a decade, 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
because the census is every 10 years.
Yes.
And I also want folks to know who have a lot of fear about completing the census and information being shared. By law, this information is embargoed for 73 years. So this information is not being shared with anyone else. It is simply so that the federal government knows how many people live in that community.
Yes. That was going to be my next statement. In a culture where everything is secretive and we have trust issues, I'm glad that you addressed that, because that is one of the reasons that a lot of people fail to fill out the census. But
And to vote.
yes.
Because there is a deficit of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand it. And that's why I say it's deeper than apathy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a lack of education. It's being an expert of your own lived experience and being disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's my job to try to do my part to restore people's faith in government and our institutions and in the people that are in these positions.
Yes. Now, in terms of, I know that we have dealt with a lot of immigrants that are here illegally. And they have questions like, should they fill out a census because they're here
Yes.
illegally? What do they do?
Same thing. You got to count everyone. Here's
Mm-hmm.
the other thing. If you are, let's say you have family that are staying with you,
Mm-hmm.
but they're not permanently staying with you.
Mm-hmm.
They may be here for 3 days or 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
They should complete the census according to the household that they're in. We know a lot of our youth are couch surfing.
Mm-hmm.
People are experiencing homelessness. Everyone, regardless of your immigration status, you should complete the census.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know an immigrant neighbor or family that is not mixed status. You have DACA recipients,
Yes.
you have TPS holders,
Mm-hmm.
DED holders,
Mm-hmm.
asylum seekers,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you want to make sure that if so many of our families are mixed immigration status, maybe the parents are undocumented, but the child is a DACA recipient and is a dreamer.
Mm-hmm.
And don't you want to make sure that your child is going to a school where there's language access?
Yes.
And where they're getting the full federal investment that our public schools deserve,
Mm-hmm.
so they can be set on a pathway and a trajectory
Mm-hmm.
to being their best selves?
Yes.
That even when you are undocumented, you are working jobs,
Mm-hmm.
contributing to our economy, contributing to our communities. And so you deserve to be invested in.
Mm-hmm.
You deserve to be invested in. So if you believe that you matter and you count, and if you believe that the people that matter most in your life count,
Mm-hmm.
then you are worthy and they are worthy of investment. And that is why you must complete the census.
Yes.
So that we have an accurate count, so that you can get the federal investment that you deserve, so that you live in a community where the resources are equitable, they are accessible, and that you can not only survive, but that you can thrive.
Yes. Well, thank you for really sharing it in that manner so that women can know that as a party of one, if I just let my family know that we're all filling out the census because we all matter, then I have done my civic responsibility. I've started it. And I think sometimes, as women, we're bogged down with so many other responsibilities that it's hard to see that we can still make a difference in our
Absolutely.
community, in the government, by just doing one simple act, and that is start with the census. Start with the neighbor that's next door to you. Have you filled out the census?
That's
Let
right.
that be a dialogue and a conversation.
It's
So
an
yes,
actionable item. They first, you had the option of doing it online. Then, if you didn't complete it online, then they will contact you by mail more than once. And if you do not complete it by mail, then they will come to your door. And although the process has been delayed and disrupted because we have to prioritize the public health,
yes,
eventually someone will come knocking on your door if you have not already completed it. So please be responsive. And again, the information is embargoed. That means it cannot be shared with other agencies or anyone for 73 years.
yes, yes. So thank you for highlighting that. I think that's an important piece of information that women can take away today, and they can make a change right where they are.
Yes.
Can you speak to us about COVID-19 and where we're at, in our district and really across the nation? We've been dealing with health disparities. Many have lost loved ones. I've been talking a lot about how, as women, we can emerge from this more powerful, really taking our communities and our lives, taking control of things that we're able to change. Where are we now? Where are we at now with COVID-19 and District 7 and the nation as a whole?
Well, this is an unprecedented
Yeah.
crisis, and it is a crisis within a crisis. It's a public health crisis. It is an economic crisis. The confluence of both is creating great hurt, great trauma. And although the virus is not one that discriminates and it is an imminent threat to everyone, we know that Black and Brown communities are more susceptible to contracting it, both because of the comorbidities of structural racism and the impacts of that and how it shows up with our having higher rates of asthma and heart disease and diabetes. So we're more susceptible, and when we do contract it, we suffer the most severe consequences. We also represent most of the essential workforces. You and I are very blessed and fortunate, Pastor Mona, in that, I'm in Washington today, but we can work from home. We can work remotely. That is only true for 1 in 5 Black women, for 1 in 5 Latinas, that they can work from home. So we also represent a higher rate of infection because we are in workforces that are essential and often without the PPE, the personal protective equipment that we need to be safe.
Yeah.
So early on, what I did was begin to bang the drum to demand that Health and Human Services have the Center for Disease Control collect racial data and to publicly report that data so that we could ensure that there was an equitable public health response, both in access to testing and to treatment. They were unresponsive. And so then I wrote a bill, and that bill was adopted and included in the last relief package that Congress voted out. So what does that mean? You might say, well, why do we need the data? We knew we were going to be hit hardest because that's been true for everything.
Yes.
You need the data to save lives because the data informs where the resources go. And prior to our getting that bill passed, the medical equipment and the resources were going distributed according to population size, not according to infection rate. And so that's what we want, is to save lives. I know this is a nonpartisan vehicle, but I have to tell the truth that due to the criminal negligence of this administration and their denials of science and their sluggish response, There are some experts who maintain that 90% of lives that we lost could have been spared. 90%.
Wow.
And when you look at a city like Boston, where Black folks represent 26% of the population, but I think by last count, 40% plus of the positive infection rates.
Mm.
So we need the data to do something that this administration did not do, and that's to get ahead of this.
Yes.
We started this pandemic out behind.
Mm-hmm.
And so the data allows us to get ahead of it, to save lives. And because my bill was included, it is now required federally that every state collect racial data and report it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why we knew what was happening in Louisiana and Michigan, in Massachusetts, because myself, Senator Warren, and several of my Congressional Black Caucus colleagues were lobbying hard. Senator Harris as well. And then we wrote the bill, and the bill was included. And so that means now we can do mobile testing. It's why you see our community health centers also being testing sites, which has also given us a better read of the landscape, lets us know where hotspots are, where trends are emerging. So we can do mobile testing, we can do contact tracing, we can do antibody testing. Now, what is contact tracing? This is where we need to move. And the bill that we'll be voting on in a couple of hours provides massive federal investments in light of the fact that there's no national strategy by this administration on testing. Here we are talking about reopening the country, but our greatest wealth as a nation, health of our people.
Yes.
So we have to prioritize public health first. We have to be led and informed by science. And so we need to test, we need to test, we need to test. So contact tracing is really important, because what that means is if someone is tested positive, someone needs to understand who they've been in contact with.
Yes.
And that is how we slow the spread and slow the rate of transmission. If you can trace how many people that person has been in contact with.
Yes.
And then either quarantine those people and or get them tested. And so you need people to do contact tracing. And Massachusetts was actually the first state in the country to do contact tracing.
Yes.
But we need to really bolster those efforts. And then on the economic recovery front, Pastor Mona, really briefly, I just have to say that I've been fighting the same fight. And that is to ensure that both in the public health response, that it's equitable, and in the economic recovery, that it is equitable.
Yes.
And we know that in earlier relief packages of the Payroll Protection Program, PPP, that true small businesses, minority-owned micro businesses, like our beauty salons, our barbershops, our restaurants, our bodegas, did not benefit. And that's because it was first come, first serve, and because of the inherent structural barriers for minority small businesses accessing capital and these sorts of things. Many of our businesses are unbanked or underbanked.
Yes.
And so these lenders were prioritizing people for whom they have existing relationships.
Yes.
People that are already in the queue. And so Senator Kamala Harris and I have introduced legislation called Saving Our Street, SOS, because we are waving the white flag. This is an emergency. We cannot afford for these businesses to close. They hire from our community.
Yes.
They are the life's blood of our local economies. They hire those who experience barriers to employment, like immigrants, like our neighbors and family members with criminal records. And we don't want to have blight in our communities. We can't afford to have these businesses shutter their doors.
Right.
We need to be growing our businesses, not closing them. And since this is a women's conference, I want to also acknowledge that businesses owned by Black women have been the fastest growing in recent years. And so those businesses that have opened, we need them to stay open.
Yes.
This is how we build wealth. This is how we build generational wealth.
Yes.
And so Senator Harris and I are in a bill. It would require a $124.5 billion fund of grants, not loans, because what we heard from our small businesses is, I'm worried I'll take a loan and I won't be able to pay it back.
Right.
So it provides grants up to $250,000. So that is not money you have to repay. And we have given the directive that grantees, 75% of those grantees must represent historically underrepresented businesses. So those are our businesses, women and minority-owned businesses. And then the other thing is that it requires a report of who is getting the grants, what industries, what geography, race, gender. We don't currently have that data from the Treasury when it comes to PPP, the Payroll Protection Program, but some experts estimate that 96% of minority-owned businesses have been excluded from PPP to date.
Yes.
And so that's why Senator Harris and I are creating this bill. And might I add, since this is a faith-based conference, the fact that our nonprofits and our faith-based institutions all had to go through the same Small Business Administration portal. We knew the capacity could never address the hurt.
Yes.
So it's not just our small minority businesses that are struggling. It is our faith-based institutions who have mortgages to pay.
Yes.
Who have employees.
Yes.
And notwithstanding the ministries that they provide, food pantries, clothes, all of these things, and our nonprofits as well.
Yes.
And so we just have not been able to meet the scale and scope of the hurt. Now, in the last relief bill, Pastor Mona, in the Massachusetts 7th, I did hear from minority-owned businesses and nonprofits who did benefit. And that is because the most recent one, the first one, no one.
Right.
The second one, some people have, and that is because we fought to have community banks added as lenders.
Yes.
So community development financial institutions, CDFIs, and then MDIs, minority deposit institutions, community banks. So Berkshire has been on it.
Yes.
You know, Berkshire has been on it.
Yes, they have.
Eastern Bank has been on it, right? I'm gonna get in trouble because I'm not naming everybody. I'm setting y'all up as a prototype, okay?
Yes.
But the point is, you know, because we did diversify who the lenders are, we have seen some incremental gains.
Yes.
But we need the next relief bill, not the one we're voting on today, but the next one, to include our SOS legislation because it is targeted to our businesses specifically.
Well, this is great news because just yesterday I was on the phone with a woman who owns a business, and she went through one bank and she was, caught up in a lot of paperwork and denials, and went to another bank and the same thing. And today she's working on yet another bank with like deadlines. And so she's been through a lot of red tape. So everything that you're saying, we're living it through the women businesses in our congregation. So that is very good news.
One other thing that our legislation changes is that I just want folks to know what we're up against. Again, I know sometimes people look at Washington and they're like, can't you all just get along, stop, this partisanship and things like that. But it's very challenging when people's lives are depending on us and you can't negotiate with people in good faith. So, we never should have had businesses like Shake Shack and Ruth Chris and Potbellies getting PPP. But my colleagues across the aisle continue to prioritize corporations, to bail out corporations instead of bailing out the people. And so the Democrats, we fought really hard to get some gains in that bill. And then what happened is after we got some gains in there, they changed they added things, Pastor Mona, like if you have a quarry, you are ineligible. The Democrats didn't vote on that. It's you've never been ineligible for SBA support if you had a criminal record. That is an interim rule they created during this pandemic after we already passed the bill. The Fed said, we're going to create an interim rule. And that was their way of excluding who could access the Payroll Protection Program. 1 in 3 Americans have a criminal record. I can't tell you how many barbershops I know, businesses that are owned because they faced barriers to employment. So they said, I will start my own business.
Yes.
If you're not going to hire me, I will start my own business and I will hire from the community and I will hire those who experience barriers to employment. So our SOS bill, introduced by Senator Kamala Harris and myself, provides a $124.5 billion micro business grant fund. Each grant can go up to $250,000. It's directed to 75% of the grantees must represent small minority women-owned businesses. And we require the racial data and gender data on who's getting the grants so we can recalibrate in real time. And we change that interim rule. So you are eligible for our grants if you have a criminal record, unless you have been convicted of fraud. I think that is in the next relief bill what they said. So there's our legislation, and then there's the change to it in the bill that we'll vote on later today. But I just want people to get a sense of what happens. We're doing our best to negotiate in good faith to center the people and everything, and then the feds will change guidance on the back end after we've reported a bill out.
Yes.
But just know that on that Corey issue, that is being addressed both in the next relief bill and also in the SOS bill that Senator Harris and I have introduced.
Well, thank you. I know as a church, as a ministry in, 2 communities, we have set aside dollars as well to help out small businesses. And I think this is our 3rd week of giving. I think so far we've given to 12 businesses to help them stay afloat. And during this conference, we're investing in some authors. We're investing in some young people that are starting businesses, even, in this quarantine, in the midst of all of this.
But that's how we change our outcomes. That's how we, that's legacy building work right there.
Yes.
So thank you all for your stewardship, for your generosity, for your sacrifice. And I know that you mentioned that there are many that are undocumented who worship at Jubilee and who are part of your Christian family. And I just wanted to say that the previous relief bills have not included our immigrant neighbors and families.
Yes.
They've not been able to benefit from stimulus funds.
Yes.
That is changed in the bill that we are voting on today.
Great. That's great news.
Because previously you had to have a Social Security number in order to be eligible. And then if you were in a mixed immigration status family, so if you were a dreamer, a DACA recipient, you have a Social Security number, you're eligible. But if they learn that anyone in your family is undocumented, you couldn't get the stimulus check.
Wow.
I mean, that's the level. This is a xenophobic administration. They're very anti-immigrant. So that's the level of cruelty that we're dealing with, even in the midst of a pandemic. And so we adjust that both in our SOS legislation in terms of immigrants being eligible, immigrant-owned businesses being eligible, as long as you have an ITIN, a tax ID number, and it's not just limited to you're having a Social Security. And then in this relief package, our immigrant neighbors and families will be eligible for stimulus funds.
Well, this is great news, and I'm glad you're with us today, informing us and informing all of those that are listening, so that we can have power. There's power in knowledge. And so now we have this knowledge, and I just encourage people to continue to seek out and gain understanding of everything that is going on. As we come to a close, I want to respect your time. A lot of the speakers today have been talking about showing up as who you are. And, it's this, it's this saying that's been going on for a couple of years. And, you did something that, many women felt was so courageous in terms of, we thought, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley shows up as who she is, but then you took us to another place. When you showed up as who you are, and you said, "This is who I am," and it was a moment for so many women. Can you just share with the women today how do you show up as your authentic self when there are so many demands for you to be, what the world says you should be? I think, kind of navigating that for some women today, especially after all the information you gave us about we have to show up because our numbers matter. We have to show up because when our numbers matter, it changes our communities. Data matters. So how do we show up? How do we gain that courage that you showed us so eloquently just a couple of months ago?
Thank you, Pastor Mona. Hmm, I don't want to get emotional about it. I'm still coming to terms with this.
Mm,
Um, and as I said in my alopecia field video, I know it's just hair, but I still want it.
mhm,
Um, but in the grand scheme of things, when I think about all that women have been robbed of and have lost,
mm,
and all that Black women have been robbed of and have lost, it certainly pales in comparison. And I had to do what I did. One, because I had been very public about what it meant to me to wear my hair in a protective, ethnocentric hairstyle and
mhm,
how liberating that had been for me.
mhm,
And I underestimated the power of that representation just in how I wore my hair
mm,
in serving in this office
mhm,
and running for office. And I just couldn't shake. I had these T-shirts that people would often wear at events that said, "My Congresswoman wears braids,
mm,
rocks a black leather jacket, and a bold red lip."
mm,
And I just kept thinking these little girls are going to wonder why I am suddenly wearing a lace front wig.
mm,
And I feel I owe them an explanation. And I want to be very clear.
mm,
I don't think that anyone is any more or less righteous
mhm,
um, if you wear a wig, a weave. Black girl magic is many iterations, and I have done it all. I had my Sade ponytail, uh, all the way down my back, my clip-in ponytail in the 90s. I've had the cute little bob
mhm,
weave. I've had my Senegalese twist.
mhm,
I've done it all. And it was one of the ways that I really enjoyed expressing my womanhood and my femininity and my blackness.
mhm,
And when I landed on these Senegalese twists, it was game changing for me. I felt like I met myself for the first time.
mhm,
So that was my experience in my walk. And so it was devastating um, when I was being met by sinkfuls of hair.
mm,
I want to say there's been some banter online about this. I do not have traction alopecia.
mm,
A braid did not make my hair fall out. This was not from tight styling or over styling. I want to be very clear about that because I have an incredible a stylist and a very anointed shop in Dorchester, Princess's Hair Palace.
mhm,
This is not from overstyling.
mm,
And I did not only lose the hair on my head. So
mm,
I started out with alopecia areata, so with patches,
mm,
but that progressed very quickly to alopecia universalis or totalis. So that means in a 5 to 6 week period, I lost all the hair on my head, my face, and my body.
mm,
And so it was incredibly traumatic.
mm,
And so I don't know if I'm especially brave.
mm,
I do think I'm authentic.
mhm,
And that authenticity means my vulnerability. And not only did I feel that I owed these little girls an explanation, but I didn't feel that I could continue to authentically and effectively lead and govern unless I came clean about it.
mm,
And what I was not prepared for, because I was sitting in so much shame and disappointment and mourning, was there are many that see this as representation.
mhm,
I did not realize how many of us are afflicted and suffering. And so I thought I was letting everyone down because I wasn't going to be wearing braids anymore. And I underestimated, my pastor, the Reverend Dr. Conley Hughes, Concord Baptist Church, said to me, "Your territory has only been enlarged."
mm,
Anyway, and that I had completely underestimated
mhm,
the number of women and Black women in particular and little girls
mhm.
who reached out to
Yeah,
me, who still reach out to me.
yes.
And it's those living with traumatic hair loss, not only
Mhm,
because of alopecia, there are 7 million people living with alopecia,
mhm,
um, but also those who were battling cancer and
mhm,
men and women,
Yeah.
adults and children, people from every walk of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm grateful for Jubilee. I'm grateful for my alopecia community.
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful for my husband,
Mm-hmm.
who made sure I never felt, less beautiful or loved, not even for a second.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter,
Mm-hmm.
it has, I'm getting emotional because I'm still working through it,
Yes.
but I feel so blessed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not fighting for my life,
Yes. Yes.
um,
Yeah.
um, and, there are so many people battling things that are much more serious than this. But it has certainly been an adjustment. And the other thing I would just share that a lot of people don't know is that this happened on the day of my mother's heavenly birthday.
Wow.
And, I was in DC because I spent 5 days a week away from my family. So I was in my apartment by myself when the last little bit of hair came out, just standing there completely bald. And I texted a picture to my husband, and he was so heartbroken that he couldn't be there with me in that moment. And I didn't even cry.
Mm.
And I think that that was because it was my mother's heavenly birthday, that I was blessed with a peace and a grace in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And the next day, I was voting on articles of impeachment.
Mm.
And I was not ready to reveal to the world that I was living with alopecia. This had all happened very quickly, and that I was completely bald.
Mm-hmm.
I could not wear a hat on the House floor. It was only until Representative Ilhan Omar was elected to Congress that you could even wear a head covering. She's Muslim and she wears a hijab,
Yeah.
but she is the only one.
Mm.
So there was no way that I could conceal this. And I wasn't ready to just walk on the floor bald. This happened at something like 11 o'clock at night.
Mm.
And the vote was going to be at like 10 a.m. the next day.
Mm.
And so my team worked with me, and my sister friend Angela Rye, you must all know Angela.
Mm-hmm.
She connected me with Jamal Edwards at a salon in DC, and he hustled and found me a wig, and didn't know me, so he did the best he could to sort of customize it according to something that would feel authentic for me, and he did a beautiful job. But and then the next day I walked onto the chamber and voted in the affirmative on article of impeachment, and gave my floor speech as to why I was voting that way. And then ran in the bathroom and cried and hid. I mean, I had very little time to come to terms with it.
Mm.
And then that speech went, viral. And I could see in the comments that people were saying, "What's going on with Ayanna?"
Mm.
Because the day before I had some semblance of braids,
Mm-hmm.
and now I was here in a lace front wig. And, again, it was beautifully styled. He did an excellent job, but people were already wondering.
Right.
And I went back to my team and I said, I won't go public with this. And then we just started to work on it. And the Root did an incredible job.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I know we have to wrap soon, but I'll just say it speaks to the power of ethnic media.
Yes.
They handled that with just such sensitivity.
Yes.
I thought it was very just tastefully
Mm-hmm.
presented. So,
Well, I'm glad you said two things that I think will resonate with women today. Is one, sometimes we can get in a box of who we reach, and we don't know that there's a bigger box, and often our pain can become our purpose, and instead of hiding, because sometimes we hide. That if we look at your story and see, that there was a level of authenticity that you had, but then there was a greater level of authenticity that you had that came out of some private pain, and that we come from such resilience that we can continue to move and grow, and we can still heal in the midst of, suffering and still moving forward. But telling our story has so much power, not just for us, but for others. because in your story, you didn't know that there was this other layer of 700 million people or 7 million people, however many you said. But I think that is what this day is about. This day that we've carved away for women is to really find their authentic voice, to, come out of, to understand that their pain has a purpose. I could feel everything that you were saying when my husband and we were raising our grandchildren, because our daughter was, she was on drugs, she was absent. Oftentimes we didn't know if she was dead or alive, but we had to keep going and raising the children and dealing with so many agencies and living our lives publicly, in front of 5 congregations. But there was something in that. Like I'm still processing through it, even though my daughter is doing very well and her children have been reunited. There's still a lot of things that I'm processing and shaping within myself. But your story is a story of, here's a person that, we all rallied around and we respect and we love, but that there was another level that your story has taken us to. So I thank you.
No, thank you. And I know my team is telling me I have to wrap because we're still voting.
Yes.
But that's a great note to end on. First of all, thank you for what you shared, and I received that, and I want to hold space for that. Sometimes people think because you have a story, you tell it so freely, that means that it's easy, but it can be triggering in its own way every time.
Yes.
And, I read a lot of poetry, and Audre Lorde, one of my favorite quotes of hers says that when we liberate ourselves, we liberate others. And in my alopecia reveal, similar to that, I said, I believe I'm not here just to occupy space. I'm here to create it. And you do that with such grace every day, Pastor Mona. So thank you for being a woman of vision. Thank you for being a woman of transparency. What I want women to know is that we are resilient, but we are not invincible.
Yes.
And it is okay to not be okay.
Yes.
The only way through is through.
Through, yes.
So you have to give yourself permission to sit in it. I didn't come out big and bad and act like I wasn't, mourning that and be an apologist. Oh, it's a shallow thing. No, you don't. The world delegitimizes the pain of women and the pain of Black women enough. So don't you delegitimize your pain.
Yes.
Give it space, give it time. That is another way of honoring yourself.
Yes.
We are resilient, but we are not invincible. And that's why it's so important, this sisterhood.
Yes.
And I just thank you. We don't get to spend time together personally,
yes,
but I admire you. I have deep respect for you, and love and appreciation. And, I feel such a kinship with you, even from afar.
Yes.
So thank you for the space that you occupy, that you create every day. And thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you, Congresswoman. We thank you for your time, and we will continue to pray for you. And I honor you, and again, thank you. I know that you have such a busy schedule, but I really appreciate what you have carved out for women on today. And so
happy to do it.
Thank you so much.
God bless. Everyone stay safe and healthy, okay?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.